Chapter 1. The Village of Whispers. The village of Duskwood clung to the edge of the great forest, like a secret it dared not speak aloud. Smoke curled from crooked chimneys, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp moss into the air. At dawn, the river shimmered like liquid silver, threading its way through fields where weary farmers bent their backs beneath the weight of another day. Life here was small, predictable, except for the girl who lived on its outskirts. Her name was Elara. They called her Cursed. Mothers pulled their children away when she passed. Old men spat on the ground and made the sign against evil. Women whispered behind their hands that where Elara went, misfortune followed. A cow sickened, a storm flattened wheat fields, a child fell into fever, and always someone would mutter, "It began the moment that cursed girl appeared." But no one remembered the kindness of her hands when she ground herbs into a poultice for a festering wound. No one admitted that her remedies had saved infants from dying in the night. They only remembered the shadows, never the light. Elara had grown used to it. Her small cottage stood where the fields ended and the forest began. Ivy climbed its stone walls, and herbs grew in clay pots along the windowsill. Inside, bundles of dried lavender and sage hung from the beams, filling the air with an earthy fragrance. It was here, in her mother's old home, that Elara had carved her solitude. That morning, she knelt in the garden, her hands dark with soil as she pressed new seedlings into the earth. The spring air carried a crisp chill, but the sun broke through the clouds in fleeting golden strokes. A robin landed on the fence nearby, tilting its head as if it alone dared to keep her company. "You're braver than the rest of them," Elara murmured softly to the bird, her voice low and melodic. "But then again, birds do not fear curses." The robin gave a small chirp and flitted away, leaving her with only the whisper of the breeze. The solitude gnawed at her some days more than others. Her mother had once told her, "Loneliness, my child, is the companion of those who carry truths the world cannot bear." Her mother had died for those truths, burned at the stake when Elara was still a girl, accused of witchcraft. That was the day the whispers began. Elara pressed her hands into the soil harder than necessary, as if she could bury her memories beneath the earth along with the roots. But memories clung stubbornly, like ivy that could not be cut away. Cursed. The word still rang in her ears, though years had passed. By mid-morning, she gathered herbs into her basket, comfrey for healing wounds, valerian for restless sleep, yarrow for bleeding. She wrapped them carefully in cloth before setting out toward the village. Though she loathed going, people came to her when desperation outweighed fear. Children burned with fevers, men broke bones in the fields, women suffered childbirth. Then, and only then, they would allow the cursed one into their homes. The walk down the dirt path felt longer than it was. Villagers paused when they saw her coming, stepping aside with wary glances. A woman drawing water from the well muttered to another, "Best spit 3 times, lest her shadow cling to us." Elara's shoulders stiffened, but she kept walking. She had learned not to respond. At the baker's shop, she paused. A thin boy with a cough leaned against the doorframe, his small face pale. Elara crouched down to meet his eyes. "You're Thomas, aren't you?" she said gently. The boy hesitated, then nodded. She reached into her basket and pulled free a small bundle. "Chamomile? Brew it as a tea, and your cough will ease. But don't drink too much, only in the evenings." His mother emerged then, snatching Thomas's arm and glaring at Ilara. "Keep your witchweed to yourself. My boy doesn't need your curses." Ilara straightened slowly, her face calm though her heart twisted. "It's not a curse, only kindness." The woman spat at the ground. "Kindness from you will be the death of us." Without another word, she pulled Thomas inside, slamming the door. Ilara stood there for a long moment, the bundle of chamomile still in her hand. Finally, she set it on the doorstep and walked away. That night, storms gathered over the forest. Dark clouds swelled like bruises in the sky, and thunder rolled across the valley. Ilara stood at her cottage window, watching lightning claw its way across the heavens. The world outside seemed restless, dangerous, as if something long held back was about to break free. She was pouring water into a basin when a sound reached her, faint but unmistakable. A groan. Her head snapped toward the door. At first she thought the wind played tricks, but then it came again, low, pained, drifting from beyond the edge of her garden. Heart quickening, Ilara grabbed her cloak and stepped into the storm. Rain lashed against her face as she pushed through the tall grass toward the forest. The trees loomed dark, their branches writhing like skeletal hands in the wind. And there, half hidden in the shadows, she saw him. A man lay collapsed on the ground, his cloak torn, his body streaked with blood. His hand still clutched a sword, though it had fallen into the mud beside him. Lightning flashed, illuminating the pale, striking features of his face. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, lips pressed tight in agony. Ilara gasped softly, kneeling beside him. His eyes fluttered open, burning with fever and pain. "Don't," he rasped, his voice raw. "Don't touch me." But Ilara ignored him. She pressed her hand against the wound at his side and felt warm blood seeping through. "You'll die if I leave you here." His gaze locked onto hers, piercing, defiant, yet filled with a strange vulnerability. He tried to speak, but his strength faltered. His body sagged against her, heavy with exhaustion. Ilara's breath quickened. She knew what the villagers would say if they found her harboring a strange man. Worse, a wounded one who looked every inch like someone of high birth. Yet something inside her stirred, something that had long lain silent, a pull, as if fate itself had placed him in her path. "Curse or not," she whispered fiercely to the storm, "I will not let him die." And with that, Ilara dragged the stranger toward her cottage, unaware that the course of her life and the fate of a kingdom was about to change forever. Chapter 2. A Wounded Stranger. The storm raged long into the night, battering the forest with sheets of rain. Inside Ilara's cottage, the air smelled of damp earth and smoke from the hearth. Shadows flickered along the stone walls as the firelight fought against the storm's fury. Ilara struggled as she dragged the unconscious man inside, her arms trembling with the effort. He was taller than most men she had ever seen, his frame broad with the build of someone accustomed to the weight of armor. His cloak, once black, was now soaked crimson where blood seeped freely from his side. She lowered him onto her narrow bed, the straw mattress groaning beneath his weight. For a moment she stood over him, breathless, her heart racing not just from exertion but from the strangeness of it all. Who was he? A nobleman, a soldier, or something darker, some omen sent to test her cursed fate? The man stirred, a pained groan leaving his lips. His eyelids fluttered fluttered, revealing eyes as striking as a blade's edge, storm gray, piercing, filled with an authority that startled her. He tried to rise, but his strength betrayed him. "Stay still," Alara said firmly, placing a hand against his chest to push him back down. "You've lost too much blood." His hand shot up, gripping her wrist with surprising force. "Where am I?" he rasped, his voice hoarse, each word edged with command despite his weakness. "My home. You collapsed outside," she replied evenly, refusing to flinch under his grip. He searched her face, as though trying to read the truth in her eyes. Then, as pain lanced through him, his hold slackened, and his head fell back against the pillow. Alara exhaled slowly and went to work. She tore away the shredded fabric of his tunic, revealing a deep gash along his ribs. Blood oozed with every breath he took. "Fool," she muttered softly, more to herself than him. "Wandering wounded in a storm." She fetched her satchel of herbs, comfrey to knit the flesh, yarrow to stanch bleeding. She crushed the leaves with steady hands, mixing them into a thick poultice. When she pressed it against his wound, he tensed, biting back a groan. "You should be grateful," she said, voice calm though her eyes flicked briefly to his face. "Most in this village would have left you to die." His gaze cut to hers, sharp even in weakness. "And yet you did not." The question lingered unspoken. "Why?" Alara turned away, busying herself with bandages. "Because death has taken enough from me." Hours passed. The storm softened to a steady drizzle, drumming lightly on the thatched roof. The stranger drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes he muttered fragments of words, names she didn't recognize. Once he gasped "brother" with such anguish that Alara felt a pang in her chest. By dawn, his fever spiked, sweat drenched his brow, and his breaths came ragged. Alara dipped a cloth into cool water and pressed it against his forehead. "You must fight it," she whispered, though she didn't know if he could hear her. "I've done all I can. The rest is yours." His lips moved faintly, a whisper barely audible. "Don't let them find me." Ilara's brow furrowed. "Them who?" The next day, while he lay sleeping fitfully, Alara stepped outside to gather fresh herbs. Mist curled between the trees, and the world smelled of wet earth. Yet her thoughts lingered on the man inside. His bearing, his voice, his very presence, everything about him hinted at nobility, or at least someone accustomed to command. But what was a man like that doing alone in the forest, bleeding out beneath a storm? When she returned, she found him awake. He struggled to sit upright, though the effort clearly pained him, his grey eyes fixed on her the moment she entered. "You," he said, voice rough but firm. "What's your name?" "Alara." He repeated it under his breath, as though tasting the sound. "Alara. And yours?" she asked cautiously. A pause. His gaze flickered, hesitation shadowing his features. Then, Kyle. The name felt clipped, incomplete, but Alara didn't press. "Why were you in the forest?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "That is none of your concern." Alara's eyes narrowed slightly. "It became my concern the moment I carried your half-dead body into my home. If you expect me to risk my neck, because the villagers will surely think I've consorted with a demon, if they find you here, you can at least give me the courtesy of honesty." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth curved, not into a smile, but into something sharper. "You speak boldly for someone branded cursed." Her breath caught. "How do you know of that?" "I listen," he said simply. leaning back against the pillow, though his eyes did not leave hers. Even wounded, I hear the whispers in the wind. They fear you. They fear what they don't understand, she replied coldly. His gaze softened just slightly. Or perhaps they fear the power you hold. Elara turned away, stung by the reminder of the label she could never escape. She busied herself with grinding herbs, though her hands trembled faintly. Kyle watched her, his expression unreadable. That evening, as the fire crackled low, Elara found herself sitting across from him. He was more alert now, though pale. Shadows painted his face in harsh lines, making him seem both weary and unyielding. "Why did you save me?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Elara blinked, surprised. "Because I could. Because I will not let death win when I can stop it. Even if death would rid you of a stranger who brings you danger." Her eyes met his, unwavering. "A healer does not choose who deserves to live. If I can save, I save. That is all." For the first time, something flickered in his gaze, something like respect. "You're a strange woman, Elara," he murmured. "And you're a secret wrapped in blood," she replied dryly. That earned the faintest of smiles from him, the first she had seen. Yet as the days stretched on, unease grew. Elara noticed shadows moving at the forest's edge, shapes that lingered too long before vanishing. Sometimes at night, she swore she heard the distant crunch of boots on leaves, or the faint neigh of horses carried on the wind. Whoever Kyle truly was, she realized, danger hunted him, and by taking him in, she had tethered herself to it. Still, when she looked at him, at the way he clenched his jaw against pain, yet never once begged for mercy, at the way those storm-gray eyes softened when they caught hers, she felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar, not fear, not even pity, something far more dangerous, something that whispered of fate. Chapter 3: Secrets in the Shadows. The forest was never truly silent, even at night when the village lay still and the moon poured silver light over the earth. The woods whispered, leaves rustled with unseen movement, owls called from high branches, and the wind threaded secrets between the trees. Elara had grown used to its language, but now each sound seemed sharper, each whisper more ominous. She felt eyes on her whenever she stepped outside her cottage, as though the shadows themselves watched. Inside, the wounded stranger, Kyle, as he had called himself, was healing, though slowly. The gash at his ribs no longer bled freely, but the fever still lingered, rising and falling like a tide. He hid his weakness with pride, but Elara noticed the tension in his jaw, the way his hand sometimes trembled when he reached for the cup she offered. On the third morning since she had found him, she walked into the cottage to find him trying to rise from bed. "What are you doing?" she demanded, striding forward. His jaw tightened. A man cannot lie idle while the world moves on without him. "You'll tear your wound open," she said, pushing gently but firmly on his shoulder until he sank back onto the mattress. His eyes flashed with frustration. "Do you think I am so weak?" "I think you are reckless," she countered, her tone sharp. Then, more softly, "I have tended too many wounds to see them wasted by pride." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Kyle's expression softened, barely. "You speak as though you've known many men who threw their Lives away, her throat tightened. She busied herself with adjusting the poultice, though the memories it stirred pricked like thorns. "My father," she said finally, "he was a hunter. He thought himself invincible. One winter he went into the forest during a storm. He never came back. My mother and I searched until our feet bled, but all we found was his bow broken in half." Cale's gaze lingered on her, his storm-grey eyes unreadable. "And your mother?" Ilara hesitated. She rarely spoke of it, not even to herself, but something about Cale's question, the quiet in it, the gravity, made the truth slip free. "They accused her of witchcraft," she whispered. "When the crops failed and children sickened, they said it was her curse. She tried to heal them, but every life she couldn't save became another nail in her coffin. One night they came for her." Her voice broke, but she forced the words out. "They burned her in the square while I watched." Kyle's hand, still pale and trembling, reached toward her. He didn't touch, but the gesture alone was enough. His voice, rough as gravel, was softer than she expected. "And yet you stayed." Ilara met his gaze. "Where would I go? The forest remembers me. The house, it remembers her. Leaving would be like losing her all over again." Silence fell, heavy and unyielding. The only sound was the crackle of the hearth. "You are stronger than they know," Kyle said at last, his words slow and deliberate. Ilara's lips curved in a bitter smile. "They don't see strength, only a curse." That night Ilara dreamed. She saw flames licking at the sky, heard the screams of her mother, felt the villagers' hands pinning her still as smoke burned her lungs. She woke with a gasp, chest heaving, the echo of fire still in her ears. She wasn't alone. Kyle was awake, watching her from the bed. Moonlight spilled across his face, carving shadows into the planes of his jaw. "You cried out," he said quietly. "It was a dream," she whispered, brushing damp hair from her face. "Dreams," Kale murmured, "often carry more truth than waking hours." Ilara turned away, unsettled. "Rest, Kyle." But she could feel his gaze linger, steady and searching, long after she closed her eyes again. Days passed. Slowly his strength returned. He managed to sit upright without her help, then to stand for short moments. His movements carried a certain grace, controlled and deliberate, like someone trained not just to fight, but to command. Ilara noticed other things too. His hands bore faint scars, the kind left by blades. His speech carried the crispness of noble courts, though he tried to blunt it, and when he thought she wasn't looking, his eyes flicked to the window, sharp and alert, like a man always expecting danger. One afternoon, as she crushed herbs with a mortar, she finally asked the question that had burned in her chest since the night she found him. "Who hunts you?" Kyle, sitting by the fire, froze. Then his eyes lifted slowly to hers. "You think I am hunted?" "I know it," she replied, meeting his gaze. "You mutter in your sleep. You look to the trees as though expecting enemies to emerge, and no common traveler carries a sword edged with a crest." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You've looked through my things. I bandaged you. I had no choice but to see." Silence stretched. The fire popped, sending sparks into the dim air. Finally Kyle sighed, the sound weary, as though the weight he carried pressed heavier than his wound. "There was an ambush," he admitted at last. "Riders on the road. They bore no banner, but I know who sent them. My own blood." Ilara's hands stilled. "Your blood?" My uncle, he hides in shadows, smiling at court while he sharpens the blade meant for my back. He has long sought the throne. The night you found me, he struck. Alara's pulse quickened. Throne, court, blood. Her gaze darted to him. Who are you, Kyle? For a long moment he said nothing. Then he leaned forward, the firelight glinting in his storm-grey eyes. My name, he said slowly, is Kalen of House Thorn, Crown Prince of Eldrin. The words fell between them like thunder. Alara's breath caught. She stared at him, the pieces of his mystery snapping into place. His bearing, his command, his secrets. You're the prince, she whispered, disbelieving. Kalen's jaw tightened. A wounded prince, stripped of his guard, hunted by his own kin, and now indebted to a woman the world calls cursed. He held her gaze, his expression unreadable. Tell me, Alara, will you keep my secret? Or will you sell it to the village that already despises you? Her heart pounded. She should have been afraid. She should have turned him out, sent him to the castle gates, let fate decide. But when she looked into his storm-grey eyes, she found only one answer. I will keep it, she said softly, her voice steady, for secrets are all I have ever owned. Kalen's gaze lingered on her, searching, and then, for the second time since he'd come into her life, he smiled, this time not sharp or guarded, but faint, fleeting, and real. Chapter 4. Hearts entwined, worlds apart. The days following Kalen's confession were different. The air inside the cottage seemed charged, every glance a thread pulled taut, every word heavy with what remained unspoken. Alara had thought herself accustomed to solitude, her heart safe in silence, but now she found her thoughts drifting to the man who lay across the room. A prince, the future king of Eldrin, a man hunted by his own blood, and yet, when she looked at him, she saw not a crown or a kingdom. She saw only the man who gritted his teeth against pain, who softened his gaze when speaking to her, who listened when most turned away. Kalen grew stronger each day. By the end of the week, he could walk from the bed to the hearth. Though the effort left him pale, he spent long hours at the window, watching the forest, his eyes sharp with a soldier's vigilance. Does it never tire you? Alara asked one evening, always waiting for shadows to strike. He turned from the window, his expression grim. A man who forgets danger does not live long enough to regret it. Alara set down the herbs she'd been sorting. But living in constant fear is no life at all. His lips curved faintly, though it was not quite a smile. You sound like my mother. She blinked, surprised. The Queen? He nodded slowly, his gaze growing distant. She told me once, when I was a boy, that the crown is a chain of iron, heavy enough to drag a man beneath the waves if he lets it. She wanted me to remember that I was a man before I was a prince. Alara tilted her head, studying him. And do you? His eyes met hers, storm-grey and steady. Since I came here, I have remembered. The words struck deeper than she expected. Alara felt heat rise in her chest, a warmth she quickly buried beneath composure. As the days slipped into one another, their conversations stretched longer. She found herself telling him stories of the forest, the hidden glen where wild violets grew, the river bend where the fish leapt at dusk, the oak whose roots twisted like the hands of an old man. And Kalen, in turn, spoke of his world, of the castle's high walls carved from white stone, of feasts that glittered with gold and laughter, of nights when the stars were hidden by banners of war. He told her of the weight of expectation, the endless demands of counselors, and the shadows of betrayal that stalked his every step. "I used to dream of freedom," he admitted one night as they sat by the fire, the flames casting a warm glow across his face. "To walk beyond the gates without a guard at my side. To be unseen, unknown." Elara smiled faintly. "Freedom is not always what you think it is. It can be lonely too." Their eyes met across the firelight, and for a long moment neither looked away. One morning Elara stepped outside to gather water and noticed a figure at the edge of the field, a villager watching her cottage from a distance. The man quickly turned away when her gaze found him, but unease tightened in her chest. When she returned inside, Kaelin noticed the tension in her face. "What is it?" "The villagers," she murmured. "They're watching. They must suspect I'm hiding something." Kaelin's expression darkened. "If they discover me here, you will suffer for it." "I have suffered all my life," she said quietly, "but I will not turn you out." He stepped closer, his presence filling the small space between them. His eyes burned with something fierce, something unguarded. "Why, Elara? Why risk yourself for me?" Her lips parted, but words faltered. She wanted to say it was because she was a healer, because it was her duty, because no life was worth less than another. But the truth pressed hot and undeniable against her chest. "Because I could not bear to see you die," she whispered. Silence hung thick. Kaelin's hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed lightly against her cheek. The touch was fleeting, tender, as though he feared she might vanish like mist. "Elara," he murmured, her name like a vow. Her heart pounded, every beat echoing louder than the storm outside. She should have stepped back. She should have remembered that he was a prince, and she a cursed outcast. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her breath trembling against the weight of the moment. But before either could speak further, a sharp knock rattled the door. Elara froze, Kaelin's hand falling away. She crossed the room quickly, pulling her cloak tighter around her shoulders before opening the door just a crack. Two villagers stood outside, rain dripping from their cloaks. One was Maran, a broad-shouldered man with suspicion etched into every line of his face. "Elara," he said, voice flat. "Strangers have been seen near the woods. Armed men, some say raiders, others—" His gaze narrowed. "Others say you've brought them here." "I've brought no one," she said calmly, though her pulse raced. Maran's eyes flicked past her, toward the faint light of the fire. "And yet you never leave that cottage for long. Who hides inside?" "No one," Elara said firmly. "Only my work." The other villager, a woman with a pinched mouth, muttered, "She lies. She's hiding something. I've seen shadows move in her window." Kaelin, hidden in the corner, tensed, his hand inching toward the sword she had hidden beneath the bed. Elara's grip on the door tightened. "You see shadows because you expect them. Leave me be." Maran's eyes lingered on her face, searching. Then, reluctantly, he stepped back. "Be warned, Elara. If trouble comes to this village, it will be laid at your feet. Cursed blood brings cursed company." With that, he turned and trudged back through the rain, the woman following close behind. Elara closed the door, her hands trembling. When she turned, Kaelin was watching her, his expression grim. "They will come again," he said quietly. "I know," she whispered. "You risk everything for me." Elara met his gaze, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. "Some risks are worth taking." Kaelan crossed the room in 2 strides, his eyes fierce. "And what if I am not worth it?" Her breath caught, her resolve breaking beneath the storm of his presence. "Then why does it feel," she whispered, "as if I was meant to find you?" The silence that followed was charged, their unspoken truths trembling between them. And though the world outside darkened with suspicion, inside that small cottage, hearts long kept apart by fate and fear began to draw dangerously close. Chapter 5. The chains of destiny, the unease in Duskwood grew like rot beneath the surface. Villagers lingered near Ilara's cottage longer than before, whispering as she passed, their eyes sharp with suspicion. Chickens vanishing from coops, fences breaking in the night. Every small misfortune was laid at her door, but this time their whispers carried more weight. They had seen the faint shadow of a man through her window. Kaelan knew the danger. "You must let me leave," he said one night as rain lashed against the shutters. He stood tall now, though his wound had not fully healed, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Every day I remain, the noose tightens around your neck. They will turn on you, not me." Ilara shook her head, her dark hair catching the firelight. "You would not survive the forest alone, not yet." His jaw tightened. "Better me than you." She met his gaze, her voice steady. "I have lived under their suspicion all my life, but you, if you fall, the kingdom falls with you. Do not speak to me of sacrifice when mine has already been made." Kaelan's storm-grey eyes softened just for a heartbeat. "Ilara?" But before he could finish, a sudden clamor rose outside. Shouts, footsteps, the unmistakable sound of a mob gathering. Ilara's breath caught. She rushed to the window. Torchlight flickered through the rain. Dozens of villagers, led by Maren, approached her cottage with grim faces. "They've come," she whispered. Kaelan's hand gripped his sword. "Then let them come." "No!" Ilara seized his arm. "If you fight them, they'll kill you, and me with you. You cannot reveal yourself." The door rattled under a heavy fist. "Ilara!" Maren's voice thundered through the storm. "Open this door, witch." Kaelan's gaze locked on hers. "What will you do?" Her heart pounded, fear and resolve warring within her. She straightened, pulling her cloak tight around her shoulders. "What I must." When she opened the door, the wind howled and rain drenched the mob's torches. Maren stepped forward, his face hard as stone. "We know you hide someone inside," he spat. "A cursed woman harboring cursed company. Hand him over or face judgment." "There is no one here," Ilara said firmly, her voice carrying over the storm. "Lies." Her heart thundered with them. The pinched-faced woman sneered. "I saw him. A shadow at your fire." Maren's hand shot out, seizing Ilara's wrist. "Then we'll see for ourselves." They surged forward. Kaelan stepped from the shadows, sword drawn, his presence filling the small room like a storm unleashed. Gasps rippled through the crowd as they saw him, tall, commanding, blood still staining his tunic, yet every inch a warrior. "Stand back," Kaelan warned, his voice like steel, but Maren's eyes narrowed and he spat. "So it's true, a fugitive hiding in the witch's den." "Fugitive?" Kaelan's jaw tightened, fury flashing in his eyes. "I am Crown Prince Kaelan of Eldrin." The words fell like thunder. For a moment, silence reigned, shocked, disbelieving. Then Maren snarled, "Lies! The prince would not hide here with a cursed woman. No, this is treachery. He is a pretender sent to bring ruin." Before Kaelin could answer, steel flashed in the torchlight. Men surged forward, outnumbering him. Elara screamed as Kaelin fought them, his sword cutting through the rain, each strike swift and brutal despite his wound. But there were too many. They wrenched the blade from his hand. A blow struck his ribs. He fell to his knees, blood dripping into the mud. "Kaelin!" Elara cried, rushing forward. But Maren caught her by the hair and dragged her back. "This witch deceived us all," he growled. "Harboring heretic and traitor, she'll hang at dawn." The mob roared its agreement. Elara thrashed against his grip, her voice breaking. "He is the prince, you blind fools. He is your rightful heir." But her words were drowned by shouts. The mob seized her, binding her wrists with coarse rope. She was dragged into the night beside Kaelin, who struggled against the men holding him, blood running down his face. "Elara!" he shouted, his voice hoarse with rage. "Do not yield!" Her heart shattered at the sight of him bound, his storm-grey eyes burning even through pain. She tried to speak, but a gag silenced her. They were torn apart. Kaelin was thrown into the hands of armored men, waiting at the forest's edge. Not villagers, but soldiers, their armor bearing the crest of House Thorn, his uncle's men. Elara, meanwhile, was dragged toward the village square, the crowd chanting curses, their torches flaring against the rain. Through the chaos, her eyes found Kaelin's one last time, and in that fleeting look, through the roar of betrayal, through the chains that bound them, she saw not despair, but a promise, a vow that this was not the end. Chapter 6. Fire and Blood. The dawn broke red. In the village square, a pyre had been built during the night. Logs piled high, ropes coiled, torches waiting. Rain had ceased, but the clouds still hung heavy, as if the heavens themselves recoiled from what was to come. Elara stood bound to the stake at its center. Her dark hair clung damp to her face, her eyes hollow with sleeplessness. Villagers gathered in grim silence, some glaring, some averting their gaze. Mothers clutched their children close, whispering warnings. "Don't look too long. The Cursed One will draw your soul." Maren stood at the forefront, his expression cold as stone. "The witch brought ruin upon us," he declared. "Her curse lured bloodshed to our door. Today we end it." The crowd murmured agreement, yet beneath their voices, Elara heard another sound, the faint thunder of hooves in the distance. Her heart quickened. Kaelin had not surrendered. The soldiers who dragged him into the forest had believed him broken, but Kaelin was a son of Eldrin, a warrior forged in the fires of betrayal. He had bided his time, waiting until they grew careless. When the moment came, he struck, snatching a blade, cutting through two men before the others could react. Blood had soaked the ground beneath the ancient oaks. His ribs burned. His wound threatened to split open, but he fought with the fury of a man who had already lost too much. By the time the last soldier fell, Kaelin was trembling, his sword dripping red, and yet he rode, stolen horse beneath him, wind in his hair, his storm-grey eyes fixed on one truth, Elara. She had saved him from death. Now he would do the same. The mob lit torches. Flames flared, crackling, hungry and eager. Elara closed her eyes. She had always known her life would end like this, in fire as her mother's had. Yet even as the heat licked close, she felt no hatred, only sorrow that she would never see Kaelin's face again. Then suddenly, "Stop!" The voice rang like a blade through the square. Heads turned. The villagers gasped as a rider burst into the square, his horse rearing high, hooves striking sparks against the cobblestones. Kaelan dismounted, sword flashing as he strode forward, his presence a storm unleashed. "Unhand her!" he thundered, his voice carrying over the crowd. Maren stepped forward, sneering. "You again. We should have killed you in the night." Kaelan's eyes blazed. "I am Prince Kaelan of Eldrin, heir to the throne you dishonor with this madness. And she," he pointed his blade toward Elara, "is no witch. She is the woman who saved your kingdom's heir when your own hands failed him." A ripple went through the crowd. Doubt flickered in their eyes, but Maren snarled, lifting his axe. "Lies! No prince would defile himself with a cursed woman." He lunged. Steel met steel. Kaelan caught the blow. The clash, ringing across the square. Villagers scattered as the two men fought, the fire casting wild shadows around them. Kaelan moved with deadly precision, but his wound slowed him, each strike costing him blood. "Elara!" he shouted between blows, his voice raw. "Hold on!" Ropes cut into her wrists. She struggled, desperate to free herself, as Kaelan parried Maren's strikes. The fight turned brutal. Kaelan slammed a knee into Maren's stomach. Maren drove a fist into Kaelan's jaw. Blood sprayed. The crowd roared, torn between fear and awe. Finally, with a surge of strength, Kaelan twisted his blade, knocking Maren's axe into the mud. He pressed his sword to Maren's throat. "Yield," Kaelan growled, "or die." Maren spat at his feet. "Kill me then, but they will never follow a prince who loves a curse." Before Kaelan could answer, a sharp cry rang out. Another group of soldiers, his uncle's men, stormed into the square, swords drawn. Chaos erupted. Elara's ropes snapped at last, cut by a terrified villager who had rushed forward in the confusion. She stumbled free, her hands raw and bleeding, just as Kaelan turned to face the new threat. He fought like a man, possessed, his sword flashing in the firelight, his face grim with determination. But he was outnumbered, 3 against 1, blades driving him back step by step. "Kaelan!" Elara screamed, rushing toward him. A soldier raised his sword high to strike the killing blow. Without thinking, Elara seized a fallen axe from the ground and swung with all her strength. The blade sank into the man's arm, sending him staggering with a howl of pain. Kaelan seized the moment. His sword arced, swift and final. The soldier fell. Another lunged, but Kaelan blocked the strike, his strength renewed by Elara's presence at his side. Together they fought, her desperate, untrained but fierce, him deadly, skilled, unrelenting. When at last the square fell silent, the ground slick with blood, Kaelan stood panting, his sword trembling in his grip. Elara stood beside him, her chest heaving, her hands stained red. The villagers stared in stunned silence. The prince, alive, the cursed woman fighting at his side. Kaelan turned to them, his voice ragged but unyielding. "Look upon her. This woman you call cursed saved my life, not once but twice. Without her, your future king would be nothing but a corpse in the mud. If there is a curse upon her, then I embrace it, for it is my destiny." He dropped his sword, striding to Elara. His hand cupped her cheek, heedless of the blood, the fire, the stares of 100 eyes. His voice dropped low, only for her. "I would rather die by your side than live 100 lives without you." Ilara's breath caught, tears burning hot down her cheeks. And I would face every fire again if it meant I could save you. Their foreheads pressed together, and in that moment, amidst the ruin of chains and fire, the world itself seemed to hold its breath. Chapter 7. The Curse Redeemed. The storm of battle left the village square in eerie silence. Smoke curled from the abandoned pyre, carrying the acrid scent of burnt wood and blood. The villagers stood frozen, torn between shame and awe, their eyes fixed on the battered figure of their prince and the woman they had once despised. Kaelin's wounds bled freely, but he stood tall, his sword raised toward the heavens. "By my father's crown," he declared, his voice steady though his body trembled, "I name Ilara of Duskwood, the savior of Eldrin. Without her, the throne would be lost. Without her, I would be lost." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Maren, bound and gagged, was dragged forward by loyal guards who had arrived in the aftermath, summoned by Kaelin's signal fire the night before. The villagers fell to their knees one by one, shame and reverence washing over them. They murmured prayers not to curse Ilara, but to beg forgiveness. The days that followed were a blur of travel and tension. Kaelin's father, King Alaric, lay ill in the capital, the court in turmoil as whispers of rebellion spread. Kaelin and Ilara, escorted by loyal soldiers, rode hard toward the castle. For Ilara, the journey was surreal. Each mile carried her further from the familiar forest paths and closer to a life she had never imagined. Yet doubt gnawed at her. "What if they hate me?" she asked softly one night by the campfire. "The nobles, the court, I am no one. Worse, I am cursed in their eyes." Kaelin turned to her, his storm-grey eyes lit by firelight. "Ilara, you are the woman who healed me when others sought my death. You are the strength that held me together when my blood stained the earth. If the court cannot see your worth, then the throne itself is not worth keeping." His words steadied her heart, though fear lingered like a shadow. When they entered the capital, trumpets blared and crowds gathered. The people cheered their prince's return, but the nobles watching from the marble steps whispered among themselves, eyes narrowing at the woman by his side. In the throne room, the air was thick with tension. King Alaric, pale but resolute, sat upon the high seat, his crown gleaming despite the lines of sickness etched across his face. At his side stood Lord Thorn, Kaelin's uncle, his smile thin, his gaze calculating. "My son," the king rasped, relief flooding his weary eyes. "The realm whispered you were dead." "I lived," Kaelin said, his voice sharp, "though not by your brother's hand." His gaze pierced Lord Thorn. "He sent men to slay me in the forest. It was his soldiers who dragged me in chains. And it was Ilara," he reached for her hand, pulling her forward before the court, "who saved me, though the world had cast her aside." Gasps filled the chamber. Thorn's smile faltered. "Lies," he spat. "You tarnish your bloodline for a common witch." Kaelin's sword rang as he drew it, the steel catching the torchlight. "You dare call her cursed? Then hear this. If she is cursed, I claim the curse as mine. If she is condemned, then I stand condemned beside her." His voice thundered, "For she is my destiny, and I will not turn from her." The court erupted, some in outrage, some in stunned silence. The king raised a trembling hand, silencing all. His gaze rested on Ilara, and for a long moment she could not breathe. Finally, King Alaric spoke, his voice soft but steady. "A woman who saves a prince is no curse. A woman who inspires such loyalty is no witch. If this is your choice, Kaelin, then it is blessed. He turned his gaze to Lord Thorn. And you, your treachery ends today. The guards seized Thorn as he sputtered and fought, his protests drowned by the shouts of the court. Kaelin dropped his sword, turning fully to Elara, his voice lowered, tender now, though it carried through the hall. I was a wounded man when I found you, Elara, but you healed more than my body. You healed my soul. They called you cursed, but to me you are salvation. Her vision blurred with tears, her lips trembling. And you were the only one who ever saw me as more than a shadow. You gave me a name beyond cursed. You gave me a destiny. He sank to one knee before her, unmindful of gasps, unmindful of blood staining his tunic. Then stand beside me, he said, voice breaking with raw truth. As my queen, as my heart, as the one fate tried to take, but I will never surrender. The throne room seemed to shatter in a roar of voices. Some cheered, some cursed, but none could deny the fire in his words, the devotion in his eyes. Elara's hands shook as she reached for him, lifting him from his knees. Yes, Kaelin, I will. And when their lips met, under the gaze of king and court, the chains of destiny broke. Seasons passed. The king's illness claimed him, and Kaelin ascended the throne with Elara at his side. The people who once spat upon her name now bowed, whispering reverence instead of curses. The forests of Duskwood bloomed brighter than ever, as if the land itself rejoiced. And in the quiet moments, when Kaelin set aside his crown and Elara her duties, they walked those woods hand in hand, no longer prince and healer, no longer cursed and lost, just two souls who had defied fate and found home in one another. They called her cursed, but he named her his destiny, and destiny had the final word.